reduce the carbon footprint of your population of consumers? What would be the most important steps for you to take then? Or you're a representative of a civil society organization. What should we be telling the government to do? Or should we be telling citizens to do? These are the questions that our project set out to ask. Our project is EU1 compatible lifestyles. And we started 4 years ago with the intent to identify the most impactful lifestyle options, the conditions of their acceptance in the population, and the structural changes that would be needed to increase the acceptance, to increase adoption rates of these lifestyle options, and to increase and maintain their influence. And on this basis, then, we said we want to develop guidance for policymakers and for citizens. EU 1.5-degree lifestyles, that's a project funded by the European Union on Horizon 2020. We are 9 research partners from 7 countries, plus 1 management organization, and we have 5 case countries in which we did all of our qualitative research. Case countries are Spain, Sweden, Hungary, Latvia, and Germany. What is important to understand about our project and to take along as we discuss it today with you is the way we understand lifestyles. The term lifestyles often invites one to think of individual choices. It has this very individualized notion to it. Right? In our project, from the beginning, we understood lifestyles to be embedded. So what consumers, what individuals, what households want and choose to do has an impact. But just as much, lifestyles are shaped by the context in which these individuals live. The technological, the political, the economic, and the societal structures. Right? So understand lifestyles, please, as an embedded concept that always takes the individual, but also the structural context into account. And we did our research in 4 consumption fields: mobility, nutrition, leisure, and housing. Why did we focus on lifestyles? Most of you in this room will know this. Let me just point it out again. We all know how much potential there is to achieve emission reductions and to achieve them fast if we look at the demand side. And that's also been supported by the here. How did we do our work? Just a broad range of methods. We had a quantitative analysis that was multi-regional, environmentally adjusted input-output analysis. But we also did a lot of qualitative work with citizens and with stakeholders. And the core aspect of that was what we call thinking apps. We sat down with citizens, we sat down with stakeholders to give them puzzles to solve. Either to replay a puzzle. You see here, and what you'll see on the back table is a climate puzzle developed on the basis of Ivan's input in the project. But we also said, so, this is the situation. Now, what are the next steps that we need to take? And you work it. What this allowed us to do is to really get our structural feedback from the people that were at our thinking labs, be it citizens, be it stakeholders. What would citizens be willing to do? Why would they not be willing to do something? What would it take to make them prepared to accept something? And in a similar way, we ask stakeholders, if that's the situation, what needs to be done? How can we get there? How can we overcome political barriers to this? That's a summary of the project, and now I will very briefly summarize our core results. You'll have the opportunity to ask overall questions then, briefly, But after that, we'll go directly into the working groups and work on questions we're going to pose to you. Right? And also at each of the tables, you have project partners able to answer your questions. So, results. First, most basic result is how crucial lifestyle changes are for achieving the 1.5 degree target. This is based on the quantitative analysis and in our project, the input-output analysis I told you about. In our partner line showed that technological change by itself, in terms of what we have, but also what we see as trajectories for the next years, will not get us to where we need to go. We will need lifestyle changes in addition. And indeed, they show that to get to the targets, especially for 2050, we will have to adopt almost all impactful lifestyle options that there are completely. So it's not a situation where we can say, oh, it's great if 20% of consumers do this and another 10% do that, right? We really need to implement these lifestyle changes, get consumers on board. What are the most impactful lifestyle changes? Again, this is what the calculations showed. By far most impactful lifestyle change to make is to get people out of cars, especially fossil fuel-driven cars. Right? And I say that as a German, knowing my government is not helpful in this. Right? But it's the most important thing to do first. In terms of housing, we need to switch to renewable-based heating and energy systems. We also need to reduce, on average, the floor space that we use and that we heat and that we cool. In terms of leisure, we all know we need to worry about flying. Right? And in terms of nutrition, we need to increase the share of plant-based nutrition. Now, working with our consumers, with our citizens, what did they tell us? We found that the acceptance for the mobility-related changes, even for reducing flying, is medium. The acceptance for switching to renewable-based heating and energy systems is relatively high. The acceptance for reducing floor space, for instance by sharing, is low. And the acceptance of moving to plant-based nutrition is also low. What did they tell us? What did stakeholders tell us? The thing that we need to do therefore. When it comes to mobility, we find relatively high awareness, we find medium high acceptance. What is clear is that we need to have reliable, affordable, accessible, functioning public transportation systems. We won't get consumers out of cars unless we give them this alternative, right? For housing, it was interesting because the acceptance was relatively high immediately, but it was also voiced always with the expectation of support. Right? Either financial support in terms of actually being able to make the switch, but also organizational support as well was needed in terms of making it easy for people to do this. In terms of reducing floor space, we found that the awareness of that floor space actually matters, that it has such an impact, not to be as high as we would have expected. So here we actually still have to do work on raising awareness. Right? Also, we obviously need housing infrastructure that, for instance, allows easy sharing. That it has a combination of private and shared space. That is surrounded, for instance, by parks and public spaces that people can use if they have less space at home. In terms of leisure, again, won't have a chance to get people out of planes unless we have good alternatives. And for that, we need transcontinental, reliable railway systems in Europe. And finally, for nutrition, again, there is awareness, of course, by now, that eating meat makes a difference. There's not that much awareness of how much of a difference it makes. There's less awareness of the impact of dairy. Right? And again, so if we even want to get consumers to move in the direction, we need to raise awareness. We will also need, given the kind of backlash this option gets, so also need really creative ways of moving into the mainstream. And that can have to do, for instance, with society in terms of what kind of food you get in downtown hotspots, you know, or on fairs or whatever, but we need creative ways. Now, even if we got consumers to do all of this, we know from the past also that rebound effects are a real problem. And so we also work with consumers about what helps them not to rebound. And here we found if they have the knowledge and skills, if they have community-based solutions, so they're not doing something alone, that will help them. That the sustainable choices have to be the easy ones, so that they don't go back to the easy, unsustainable ones. That it would help to limit advertising when it comes to high carbon emission activities, right? So that we don't tell consumers, don't do this anymore because it really is carbon intensive. But 24/7 we tell them, oh, why don't you do that? And it would help to encourage sustainable financial practices, so that if you really manage to save money somewhere by living more sustainably, you also use it on the sustainable manner. We also learn, or especially work with our stakeholders on the big wheels on the back of everything. Very often when we talk about sustainable consumption, we try to fine-tune the individual instruments that are targeted at individual consumer choices. While the big wheels on the background turn in the other direction, right? We still have, and maybe more than ever, governments focused on growth and competitiveness, right? And finding it hard to tell consumers, maybe we can't afford growth anymore in all areas. Maybe we need to take a more differentiated look at growth and see in what industries do we still need growth, like renewable energy, but what sectors are so harmful that we should really get on it. And of course that's a politically hard thing to do, right? It's with everything. You know, it's much easier to hand out subsidies than tax people, right? It's easier to hand out subsidies than to take them away. So whenever, you know, something is supposed to be negative, you take something away, then that's harder. And same applies to saying, well, you know, in this sector, maybe we'll have to do this. We also need more stringent, more coherent policies. And what was interesting in both citizen and stakeholder thinking that there was a lot more support for bans than we would have expected. Bans because they were perceived as fair, as designed to everybody. That we don't have these kind of policies has a lot to do, of course, with the power of vested interests in our democracy. So these kind of points are interconnected. Also that we're not yet good at really internalizing carbon costs. It's also clear that we need, as societies, we need a dialogue about what is well-being, what is prosperity, where do we want to go, what is the most important, right, rather than perpetuate unsustainable ones. So to address social inequality and design eco-social welfare systems to make sure that when we move towards a more climate positive future, we don't lose part of the population that feels it's taking the brunt of this, that feels like carrying an unfair part of the burden. And we've seen all of those developments and politics in recent years. We took these results and went with them to the EU. We did a policy workshop there and we did a stakeholder workshop there as well. And with the policymakers, we talk about the importance of making sustainable choices easy. That was also first and foremost on their mind. Their incentives, their pricing, and systemic support. They also said focus on reforming economic structures, phase out harmful subsidies, integrate well-being into beyond GDP. So these were things that were on policy makers' minds at the EU level. Interestingly, they also looked a lot at the local level. We had gone to the EU level to talk to them. They said, well, we really also need to work at the local and at the city level. And they saw more room for movement here. And finally, they're also very much aware of the need to counter misinformation, to counter destructive narratives. The stakeholders, the narratives were the first thing they wanted to talk about. The need to have enabling narratives that actually engage citizens, that allow the adaptation of sustainable concepts to local realities. Talk to citizens where they need, get them from what their experiences to take on. In this context, they also highlighted the importance of reframing climate action, focus on fairness, focus on well-being, and true benefits of climate change, climate positive developments. They also said we need to strengthen our alliances, to work across the aisle between environmentally and socially oriented NGOs to be able to counter the power of vested interests. And finally, they also said we have to transform market rules. As long as the market incentivizes unsustainable behavior, it's really hard to go against them. Summing up, where does this leave us? And to talk about the results on two levels. First one is the direct one. We need to make sustainable choices accessible, affordable, easy, and perceived as fair. That's the bottom line. And the most important thing to help us do that is collective provision. Infrastructure investments that allow everybody to participate, be it in mobility infrastructures, in housing infrastructures, in energy infrastructures. Because those provisioning systems target both the accessibility and the perceived fairness, and so on. So they cover these challenges. In this, we also need organizational support to make the sustainable choice the most easy one, and not the other. If we want to work, if we need to work with financial support, we need to make sure it's targeted. We all know the problem of subsidies that we've had for instance, electric vehicles. Not everybody in the population is able to benefit from those. So we need to be clear on how we target whom in terms of making subsidies aligned with income. Also need to take into account other aspects of financial support, like older people trying to renovate their house often have trouble getting a loan. Right? This kind of stuff. And finally, we need to emphasize the alignment of what we do for the climate with core societal needs, or rather, we need to turn the narrative around. We need to say our core societal aim is well-being in the future, is health, is collective well-being. Then we also need to work on the climate in order to understand that doing nothing is the most unsocial thing we can do basically. Secondly, now if we know that we should be doing all of this, we all know that we've known a lot of things for a long time, right? When it comes to climate change. And sadly, the politicians, they don't listen to us. They don't understand. So what can we do? Especially now, in this changed political climate, we're not in 2019 anymore. with Fridays for Future dominated news, right? What can we do in this, especially in this changed political climate, to still to mobilize for climate governance? As I just said, I think we need to make eco-social approaches the cornerstone of what we do. And that means from the beginning, not just start by saying, oh, if we pursue this climate policy instrument, that will create a burden for the poorer people, and therefore we have to introduce some compensation. But start in the current situation and show how asymmetric costs and benefits are distributed of climate action, especially no climate action. We need to create and strengthen broader actor coalitions if we want to be able to achieve political momentum. We need to be very effective in communicating in terms of target audience, content and narratives, but also in terms of the kind of communication structures we use. You have teens at home, like I do. You know, they get their information, not from the sources I get my information, right? And I have to say, I'm not good at communicating via their channels. And still, I think we need to take this reality into account, that the younger generation functions differently in terms of communication than we do. And finally, we need to enable the sharing of responsibility rather than pointing the finger at different actors to take the lead. We need to take it together with clear roles and also with broad impact assessments that allow us to keep actors to their responsibility, to say, you're underperforming, you have to do something. And that's the summary of our project. As I said before, if you have immediate questions, we can try to answer them. Otherwise, at each table we have project partners. Paliki and Leah are here. Maren and Edina are at the next table. Janis and Christoph back there. Lena and Marianne in the corner. Dana and Jani. And next, sorry. With her. And Michael and this is so embarrassing thinking.
You know what for me?
It's her name. and she's only joined recently too. We brought some questions for you. And we really like to get into it.
Great. Do we have any immediate pressing questions for Joyce before we move into the second phase, the main course of the event, if you will? Go. Okay, great. Then we'll just spend the next hour or so discussing the groups at the table. So get settled in, get to know each other. Maybe